Hey everyone, Shayna. Yeah, it's on. Chirag comes with an extensive experience working with organizations of all sizes and enabling their data and analytic needs. He focuses on improving the overall use of data to enable better decision-making for the organization and departmental use cases. He currently works with Accenture as a senior manager in their strategy consulting practice with focus on applied intelligence and data engineering. Today, he will discuss enabling self-service analytics with new data mesh and data products.
Thank you for the introduction. Can everybody hear me? All right. All right, thanks for being here. You made it. Last session of the day.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that everybody here is in the right session.
I'm not crazy about that echo,
but we're not going to focus a whole lot on this that one concept, right? We're going to spend time talking about the self-service, talk about data mesh, and talk about data products. But most of all, I would like to mention this right now. If you have any questions while I'm talking, please stop me. I would like to cover the questions as they come up, right? And then if we have time at the end, we can definitely continue with any additional questions. So with that said, so that's sort of our agenda, right? So we're going to take a look at self-service analytics in general, why we are talking about the data product, data mesh at this point, and what should it look like downstream. So as per Gartner, self-service analytics is a form of business intelligence in which line of business professionals are enabled and encouraged to perform queries and generate reports on their own with non-IT support. So there's a lot of keywords in there that is related to business intelligence, enablement, encouraging to perform queries, generating reports on their own with nominal IT support, right? And I'm assuming everybody here is familiar with data warehouse. You probably, either you're leading or you're doing development in those spaces, right? That's why you are in this session right now. And I come with an extensive background, 20 years plus now, working with data warehouses in one shape or another. And over the years, we have seen that things are changing, right? So if you have been in this industry or in this line of work for more than a few years, you would have seen the data growth has been the primary indicator, right? Hadoop came around over a decade ago, became easier to store data on slightly cheaper hardware, but much easier to store things into the database or into the HDFS systems. Then came your ability to query on top of that using Hive. Then it got better with Spark, and now everything goes into some sort of a data lake somewhere. So your data is exploding. On top of that, we have IoT explosion. So you are generating so much more data now. I read one article recently that talked about in 2021, there were about 65 zettabytes of data that was generated. It is expected that by 2025, that number is going to go to like 175 zettabytes. And this is the data that's being captured, not just the data that flies around wirelessly. So you can things are changing now with that, right? Data warehouse is no longer the right fit for all these kind of scenarios. Additional reasons, data formats are numerous now. The previous session talked about data becoming JSON formats, XML formats. Of course, they've been around for a while, but complexity has gone up. Right? Your data integration pipelines they slowly start to become brittle. As your source data changes, it becomes harder to ingest new data streams. You have to constantly keep updating it. And at the end of it, the challenge is that how many business rules can you really apply to put all this data into your EDW, into your centralized data store. Even if you have multiple data marts, you're trying to make data marts that are specific for different lines of business or different domains within your business. It is a very capacity intensive task. And when I say capacity intensive, it is the team capacity intensive, right? You can't just keep adding more people in an organization just to support these activities. So it's a growing problem, and that is essentially the case where we think that we need to find a better way of doing this. So data mesh, right? So you're probably familiar with the term already. Data mesh was just, it's a brand new concept, started around 2019. And if you Google it, you'll find that, it basically talks about how to do things. This is not a prescription as to what technologies to use or how to go about doing specific builds, but it's a, let me just read this to you. So, decentralized socio-technical approach, managing data at scale, especially as the number of producers and consumers proliferate. Data mesh applies a purpose-driven product thinking. So product thinking here is extremely important to your data, where the ownership is distributed to domain experts. So again, this talks about the domain experts. So we'll cover these a little more detail. These experts will own, manage, and publish their data products. So for self-service access by consumers and require a federated governance model. Right. So this talked about the 4 principles of a data mesh. First one is the domain ownership. Second one is data as a product. Third one is self-service data platform. And the fourth one is federated computational governance. We can talk a little bit more about these things. So domain ownership. Now, when you're thinking about EDW, your enterprise data warehouse, your EDW team is the one that is pulling data from multiple source systems, plugging it into your enterprise data warehouse. Or it could be smaller data mart, but again, that one team is doing this. It's a horizontal split, right? That this particular team is not going to be an expert in the data itself. They may understand it to some degree, but nowhere close to what a domain expert would understand. And when we say domain ownership, we're talking about where the data originates, or somebody who is really close to it. For example, if you think about supply chain, in supply chain, you are going to have product managers who are responsible for acquisition of products from different vendors. So if you're talking about like vendor-specific product data, that person will have the most knowledge, at least more than your EDW team, right? So the idea here is that you want to give that team, the product management team, you want to give them the access, or you want to basically make them own the data product. That product has that data related to vendor and items, right? It could be the quantity of order that was placed with them, the shipping dates, it could be the payment terms, how many units were on time. All of those metrics that are associated with vendor orders is their area of knowledge. So they become the domain owners of that particular data. The second one is data as a product. Now, when you talk about data as a product, we're not talking about selling the data, but we are talking about making the data shareable within your organization, right? Easier said than done, okay? But the idea behind this is that when that order information is obtained by the supply chain personnel, they know what granularity of that data makes sense. How do you put that data into a consumable format? Does it go into a data warehouse? I'm sorry, does it go into a table? Does it go into Kafka stream? It could be any of the systems. Does it you extract the data orders and plug it as a file in your S3 bucket, right? So how do you make that available so that end user is able to get to it and know that this data is correct? Now, data as a product, again, there are a few key things with this. The data needs to be trustworthy, right? So if the data has to be clean, right? So when somebody says, I'm going to publish data, you basically have to go through, put the effort into it to publish that data. It is not just copy pasting the data from this system to that system. It is more so making sure that you are getting the data and making it available in a consistent format, in a consumable format, in an agreed upon format with everybody else. And I'm touching concepts with the other two areas as well. So, I talked about like interoperable. It needs to be, it needs to work with other systems or other data sources. So, for example, your vendor information, if you have your vendor IDs coming in here, they have to match your warehouse inventory data if you're tracking it down to the vendor level, right? So that all of that has to be in sync with each other. Now, once you have all these data coming together, how do you get to it? Like, how do you know that there is a supply chain or product vendor data available somewhere? And that's where your self-service data platform comes in. So in this particular data platform, the idea is that once the data products are published, it is queryable in some form. Now, queryable does not necessarily mean that it's a database query or like CSV files that you can query, but it's about being able to find that data, right? Somebody in the org should be able to say, and a common way that I've seen this being done is a UI. So you have almost a data marketplace, which you post your metadata of the data, and somebody else who wants the data can come to it, ask for access, and then be able to access that data. So again, the idea is that it's a self-service platform where somebody should be able to come in, request the access, get the access, and then get to the data. So all of that has to be encompassed in this data platform, self-serve data platform. And last but not least is your federated computational governance. Now here, the idea is that the data is governed where it is, right? So when the data product is being built by your domain experts, they will place it somewhere. The clean data that's organized for consumption needs to be governed by them. So you're sort of putting the responsibility on that team, right? And once you start doing that, you are thinking about distributing this ownership of data now. So once that distribution of ownership is done, how do you make sure everything comes together? Because that becomes a huge challenge, and it's easier said than done, but it's a shared responsibility model where there needs to be representation from all of these different producers. At the same time, you need to have representation from your IT security. They can't just keep publishing PII data for easy consumption. Things of that nature. There is standards to follow. There is regulations like PCIs and all of PCIs or HIPAA or whatever regulation needs to apply, including your internal company standards. So all of that is encompassed in this fourth principle of federated computational governance. So a mesh, essentially, you can think of it in 3 different layers. At its core, it's basically decentralized because you want the data coming from each domain. So EDW was a centralized form. You're bringing everything into your EDW. This approach is talking about leave the data where it is, sort of, right? You don't need to massage it to make it fit into one particular database. But the responsibility is now placed on the producers rather than your central IT team. And I've worked with many clients where they basically, the IT team is managing all of the ETL pipelines. There is issues with things on a daily basis because once the data comes in, it is not clean. There is very specific rules that they are not aware of. And the reports are basically just reading straight from there. They basically want to get out of the data assimilation and be able to provide the value, right? So your IT actually plays a key role in here where they are the ones that would do the whole governance. We talk about decentralization, but when you talk about governance, you need to centralize on the understandings, the approach, and how, on what rules everybody is going to follow, right? So this is more of a wider thinking rather than just an IT focused thinking, because you have to now collaborate with your business partners because they now own the data, they now control the source of the data. And again, let's see. And again, like I said, it's always keeping the data in one place. It's great. I love EDWs, star schema, Snowflake. It's amazing. They do their job. But it's when you start spreading out the ownership of the data, the governance becomes an extremely important aspect of it. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the data products, right? So I covered this a little bit earlier, but data products need to be discoverable. So I should be able to find it, right? Like I should know where to go to find this, this data. So imagine a UI, a data marketplace UI, where I come in and I say, I want vendor data. I should be able to go there, search for vendor, and based on the metadata that was added on beforehand, I should be able to see that, hey, these are the different data sets that are providing me vendor data, right? It needs to be addressable. That means I need to be able to consume it. So where do I go to get this data? How do I request access to it? All of that information should be available through this data marketplace. A lot of companies have these, if you want access to a specific database, you probably have a system where you go and submit your ticket. Could be, ServiceNow, or it could be Jira ticket, or maybe it's a homegrown system. So you go ahead and, integrate that with your data marketplace. It should be self-describing, meaning that when you look at the data columns, you should be able to just read the metadata and be able to make sense of it, right? Like, how do I use it for my own queries? It needs to be trustworthy, like we talked earlier, right? So the data, the team that is generating the data needs to be able to say that this data is clean. It goes through these checks. Here is our validation of it. Here are the rules that we apply. All of that information needs to be made public, and somebody should be able to go and validate all that. And if you think a little further on that, you can even have metrics on top of that as to how clean the data is, the number of nulls, the unique values, like basically your basic data profiling. It could also be done at that stage. It needs to be secured. So you have to have access to be able to get the data. There could be some data sets that are publicly available within your organization, But again, there will be, most of the time, you'll have data sets that are not supposed to be accessed unless you have a specific login to a database or specific role in a system. And I guess one of the most important one is interoperable. So data coming from supply chain should work with data coming from finance, should work with data coming from the warehouse inventory, should work with data coming from a returns order that was placed. Right. So we talked about a lot of what it is. Let's talk about what it is not, right? Because there is a huge, I guess, confusion around that. Let me just minimize this. So data mesh, it's not a tool and it's not just a process. Okay, it is an approach of managing analytical data at scale. Okay, it is not a mechanism to produce data products, right? So we're not saying how to produce this data products right now, but we're saying that think of your data as a product. Like think of like if you're going to sell this to somebody, what do you really need to do, right? Because you're actually selling to your colleagues internally within your company. It is not an architectural pattern. It goes beyond architecture and it involves peoples and processes. So you have to have, we talked about the governance of it. We talked about interoperability of the data. All of that is talking about, different people working together to establish specific processes. It is not technology focused, right? So it does not prescribe use this or use that. It requires technology, but it's not a specific technical solution, right? So you could apply data mesh concepts to your on-prem system, to your cloud system, to your basically any system that you want it to apply to. And last but not least, it doesn't mean that everything is decentralized, right? It needs an equilibrium, and you have to come to a consensus on what to centralize, what to decentralize. If you have a robust EDW in place right now that suffices for 75% of your reporting requirements, that could become one of your sources as a data product, right? You create a self-service analytical report in like Power BI or Tableau or MicroStrategy, whatever you're using. And that could become one of your data products. Okay. So, we go from our data warehouse concept, our data lake concepts, and we slowly move towards a data mesh concept. Let data stay where it is. But again, it does not mean that if your data is in your Oracle ERP system, you keep it there. I mean, that's not a good place to allow somebody to come and query. So it needs to be put somewhere. But that is to be answered by your governance, right? If you are an Amazon AWS shop, maybe you put it in an EMR cluster. Maybe you use an Azure data lake for this as your central store. Or if you are using Snowflake, you could have a raw landing zone where you're putting a lot of this data into it. So it could apply differently at whatever place, whatever is being used. So leverage your existing technologies in order to utilize this. All right, so what does it look like overall? Okay, so what does the new self-service sort of look like? So just a quick legend on the side here. You have your data ecosystem. So this is all your data sources, right? Your internal data, your third-party data, your partner data. You have your producers. Producers are all the people that are within your organization that are going to be generating some sort of data output. Could be your reports, could be a forecast, could be an ML model, anything. Any of that, you basically consider them as producers. To your right, you have your consumers. You have your business users, advanced users, data scientists or analysts, and you have even your internal systems could become one of the consumers, because an API could be considered a data product, right? And in the middle here is your data products, right? You could have your exploratory types, you can have ready to use types. So exploratory is like it's curated data that's that's available for your own analysis. You could be writing your own queries on top of that. Pre-built data models that are suited for specific domain functions. You have your AI models, you have your APIs. All of that is exploratory in nature. On the other hand, you have your ready-to-use data. So you're talking about specific dashboards, you're talking about specific reports, or maybe KPIs that you have established. All of that is your ready-to-use information. And then you have a function of producing this, right? Producing the data products. So these are domain-specific functions, like I mentioned before. So your team that resides within specific domain takes the ownership, they build the products, they manage the products, and then they basically operate the products. So they have to keep it updated with their latest business changes, new requirements, data model changes, anything that's happening, it goes in there. On the consumption side, you have your consumer products, and typically this is managed by the consumer itself. So if you want to create an AI model or ML model that is using your supply chain data and your inventory data, then you basically, you are the consumer of this. It is your responsibility to get the data, to do your work, and produce your output, right? You do not replicate the data. It's possible you could replicate some of it, but the idea is not to get everything from the data product and just replicate into your own database. The idea is that you use that as a source to whatever degree you require this. And management sits across all of this, right? And when we say management, we're not talking about people manage, it's more of the process management. We're talking about governance, we're talking about establishing an architecture, we're talking about how do you operate among all of these data products. And everything comes together with the right orchestration. So you have your UI, a catalog, or metadata, whatever you want to call it, where you come in, you discover the data, you get access to it, and you understand the data, you do your analysis, and you build your own workflows, right? And all of these things connect to each other. So you can't do one without the other. All right, so success factors for, yes, please. Can I go back? Oops. And I will flash my contact information at the end. If you want to talk further about it, please feel free to reach out. I'm very passionate about self-service overall, and the whole concept of data mesh is definitely something that resonates very well. Okay. All right, so talking about the success factors, right? If you decide to go the route of working with data mesh, working with data products, adopting even some of the principles, data ownership is one of the key concepts, right? The thing is that making an owner versus living that is very different, as you already know. And you need to establish that custody of data, but you also have to establish and agree upon that with everybody else. And when I say everybody else, if you are new on the journey, it's going to be a very small group. right? You will probably work towards establishing some sort of a governance layer. Certain people within your organization becomes the founding members of that governing committee, and you start establishing small steps towards a bigger picture. I would refrain from doing like a big bang approach on this because it's going to be extremely hard, and the hardest part is going to change the people's behavior rather than the technology. From a data product perspective, publishing the data has to be one of the, we know that's a key concept, but it needs to be clean, consistent, and documented, right? Data has to be prepared for publication. If you are selling a product to the market, product has to be good. I'm sure everybody has had some experience around users losing trust, and then you have to work 4 times harder to regain that, right? So again, no free lunch. You have to take it. It has to be prepared for the right publication. And there is a huge need for human readable documentation, right? Because you are aiming this at users, not necessarily a downstream system. Discoverability, I talked about data marketplace, right? So somebody should be able to come in, search for it, browse for it. It's one of the key success factors. And you want to define your implementation, right? So this is where the governance comes in. You have to have established what interfaces are you going to use. Like if you're an AWS shop, like I mentioned before, maybe an EMR cluster is the right thing for you. Or maybe there is a specific DB instance that's going to be used for some of the work, right? Are you going to be doing Kafka streams and pub/sub models? So different domains will have different approaches. And granting the granularity of the granting an understanding of the granularity of data, right? Again, documentation, metadata is the key here. And last but not least, security, right? I can't stress that enough. In today's world, we know there is so many leaks happening, hacks happening, ransomware happening. Security of the information is always one of the utmost important items to consider. All right, so if you go this route, there are many touches to this, okay? It's like I've tried to cover a lot of these earlier. Incremental implementation, right, is something you could do with this. The challenge is that additional responsibility for departments. If you are thinking about going this route, there is ways to approach, and you will have certain domains who are more data savvy than others. Others may require upskilling. You may need to expand teams. So there's a lot of things that go behind this. Advantage is it's fast, right? Once you get started on this, you can start building things very quick. If you understand the domain, it's not very hard for you to produce a data product, and you incrementally improve it. But disadvantage or challenge is that it's easy to create inconsistent products, right? Advantage here, it can easily coexist with your legacy systems, but then again, acceptance depends on the discoverability and the net value added based on this. Advantage is that your reporting infrastructure and different people can use their own data models and hardware, but the cleaning of data is a challenge, right? You want everything to be interoperable. And from a producer standpoint, you retain the domain's formatting. So if you're getting data in your NoSQL format, or it's a log file or clickstream data or geospatial data, it could stay in that format. And on the flip side, it could become a challenge to consume this information now, right? So again, your governance is one of the key things here to make sure that it's doing those, it's making the data consumable in an easier fashion, right? So, right, that's all that I had prepared for you. Any questions here? Yeah.
So, about the discoverability part. So that's a big challenge because so that's a big challenge. One of the big challenges that our team is facing because the PII data, PHI data,
Right,
is not accessible by those business folks who do not have access. Right? But at least they should know that data is available.
right.
So what are your insights, tools, approaches, open data?
So I guess I'll answer that a little bit generically. If you have PII data in your source systems, right, you probably want to have that metadata available, right? Somebody should be able to say, is it a healthcare type deal or healthcare? Okay, so if you have like the person's name or date of birth, things like that, that's stored in your underneath database, the data product could be two, I guess, it could be two data products. One that is encrypted columns, right? So you still maintain your data granularity, but it is encrypted. And the person that wants the data but does not have PII access could potentially use that, right? But if you have somebody who has the access to PII, they should be able to use that same data product, or maybe it's a separate data product if you want to, just put additional security around it. And they should be able to see that, because that's going to be a pretty small set, right? But that's probably one of the approaches I can think of. Any other questions? No? All right, then thank you very much for your time. Email formatting disappeared somehow, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me by email or reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to answer any additional questions that you have. And one last plug-in here is Accenture Is Hiring. So if you're interested in joining Accenture, careers.accenture.com. And I look forward to getting any additional questions that you may have. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Chirag.
Sure thing.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Hope you have fun.